Hello everybody, thanks for joining us today. Myself and my colleague Ed Corbett from HSE is going to take you through a presentation on leadership, but hopefully it'll be slightly different from the other leadership presentations we all know, sit through, preaching to the converted. We're hoping you're going to get a few takeaways from this one. Some ways you may start thinking of things differently. You may or may not agree with what HSE feel leadership values are in terms of health and safety management. And then Ed's going to give you some ways of thinking about human error and how simple interventions can actually be quite powerful, and how we sometimes overthink what we need to do within the workplace in terms of introductions of human factors issues. So the agenda today, so welcome introduction. I'm Matt Powell-Howard. So I'm Head of Strategy at NEBOSH, and I'm joined today by my colleague Ed.
Hi, so yeah, Ed Corbett. I head up Human Factors and Psychology teams in Science Division in HSE.
It's a real pleasure to be here today talking for the Safer Highways audience. I've spoken to a few colleagues from Safer Highways before. And I mentioned that I used to work within civils back in the days of the Major Contractors Group. So I'm aware of some of the challenges that you face. I'm sure the controls have moved on a great deal, in the last sort of 15 years. I would hope that's the case. And certainly the introduction to Safer Highways as somebody who can represent some of the challenges is a fantastic innovation. I wish Safer Highways was around when I was working in the field. So we're going to go through the leadership values. So NEBOSH and HSE have a shared qualification on health and safety leadership excellence. So I'll take you through the leadership values which form part of that assessment. Quick whistle through there. Then we've got a Q&A session, and I can relax a little bit while I fire some questions at Ed and to get his thoughts on simple leadership interventions, what a good leader looks like, and how they can be, and how you can bring in some interventions to be really impactful within the workplace. And then we're going to just briefly touch on human error and some more low-cost interventions at the end of that. So that's what we're going to run through over the next sort of half an hour, and we'll see how we get on. Right, I'm just going to take this first bit then. Preaching to the converted very often, aren't we? The number of conferences I've been to, and it's been about leadership. We all know it's a jolly good idea, and actually it's essential, but there's no single definition or concepts of leadership. But the best example we could find was one by CIPD, actually. And it's given to you there on the screen. It's about leadership can be defined as the capacity to influence people by means of personal attitudes and or behaviours to achieve a common goal. And when Ed and I was putting this presentation in together, those personal attributes are really difficult. Certainly some people can go on no end of courses and they'll never ever be a great leader. So the value of appointing the right people in the right positions at the right time is something we will touch on in this presentation. So the key leadership values, and I'll go through these in a little bit more detail in a moment, are the 5 that are in the screen there about building that shared health and safety vision, being considerate and responsive, providing support, recognition, fairness, trust, encouraging improvement and innovation. And what underpins these values is involvement and communication and effective role modeling. And again, we'll be touching on these bits as we go through. Now, you could argue that those leadership values is just good leadership. And in this instance, we're looking into health and safety management. But if somebody can demonstrate those values in whatever role they are within an organisation, well, then that would be a jolly good thing. So that first bit then around health and safety vision. So the vision, where do you want to get to, and how are you going to get there? Build on your current successes. You've got more likely for it to be adopted if you do that. Simple vision should be simple, succinct, non-ambiguous. You want to make them very, very easily understood. And that vision should also be shared. So you need to give people the chance to contribute. All too often people put ideas forward and then they disappear. It was a constant bone of contention when I've been in she roles in the past. Ideas are put forward. Well, what happened to them? Where's the visibility of that? And you need to be sharing that with them. Keep that vision in everybody's minds and keep them on board. And that it should be recognised as it's not just the vision for now, it's going to be a longer term process in developing and agreeing that vision. Yeah, we want leaders to be considerate and responsive, and that almost goes back to the bit I said before. When somebody puts something forward, they want feedback. But, we know that people respond well to other people when they are shown empathy and consideration. Putting yourself in that person's shoes, that person's steel toe cap boots, and understanding why they have issues or why they can't work in a certain way, or the controls or the PPE or whatever it may be presented to them isn't appropriate, or that the vulnerability that they feel because of where they're being asked to work at the side of the road, for example, is problematic for them. Try to show some empathy, try to understand what their issues are. So HSE feel that leaders should listen and respond appropriately to those concerns when they're raised. Respond to workers' needs, provide training if it's required. That doesn't have to be formal training. Shouldn't be saying that as NEBOSH, should I? Should be saying everyone needs to go on an NEBOSH course, and they do. But very often training, can just be on the job. Of course it can. Perfect. And then that providing coaching when required. Now, hopefully those people who are listening to this webinar, many of you will be in a SHE function. And actually, we are coaches, aren't we? It's what we do. And it's what we're very skilled at. When you actually look at what you spend your working day doing, hopefully a significant proportion of it is that in that coaching role. So the third value is around providing support and recognition. People recognize and respond positively when they get good feedback or when they know what their contribution is valued. You get buy-in. People are more likely to do things for you if they like you, respect you. Training development contributes this, of course it does, because you're showing that you're investing in individuals. So the types of behaviors that we look for in terms of health and safety leaders is that they're recognizing and rewarding safe behaviors. They understand what will motivate, they understand their teams. They understand that not necessarily money is a motivator, there'll be other motivators as well, but that they ensure the appropriate resources are available at all times. And it's the correct type of resource, good value resource. And that may be good tools, good equipment, good PPE, competent fellow colleagues, I would argue, is an appropriate resource within the workplace. Okay, so the values, number 4, promoting fairness and trust. So, you've got to demonstrate honesty, you've got to demonstrate integrity, you've got to earn trust. And there's a saying that one of our alumni told me a few weeks ago, and Ed's heard me say this a few times now, but I was really taken with it. Trust comes in on a tortoise and out on an antelope. That's really true. We all know that's true. So it's going to take time to earn that trust, but being honest, being fair, having integrity certainly helps massively. Really difficult to build that relationships without the demonstration of those qualities. But leaders, of course, you must talk the talk and walk the walk. You are being observed in the workplace. We know that, don't we? People are waiting for us to not put our PPE in properly, not follow the correct hygiene processes. I should have said really at the moment that both Ed and I are doing this remotely because we're in the middle of the COVID controls within the UK, and both of us are still home based at the current time. But yeah, we're all operating at the minute in difficult scenarios, being remotely based. But even when we are back at work, and as many of you already will be, you've got to demonstrate that you actually believe what the organisation has introduced. It's 101 safety, that, isn't it, really? Nothing earth-shattering there at all. Although you'd be surprised how many people forget to do it. And then sharing responsibilities and the delegation. We can't all do it ourselves, but share that responsibility. Tell people what you want them, what you want them to do, and how you want them to do it, and be really, really clear in that. And people are much more likely to adopt and accept what it is that you're telling them or asking them. The 5th value is about encouraging improvement, innovation, and learning. So, yeah, we're going to listen to our people, and we're also going to act on what we learn from that organisation. We know that organisations have a very short-term corporate memory. So we really need to be embedding this within the management system, the learning that we take from these conversations. And these suggestions that are put forward, the people who work in our teams and in our organisations are our treasure trove. They really are. They're the treasure chest we're going to dip into and we're going to get those ideas from. I need to listen, and we're going to give them that feedback we've spoken about. And those people who want to learn more, who are hungry to learn more, and who demonstrate promise, we'll take them with you. Try to think of some development opportunities for them. And the underpinning supporting foundations of all this is the effective role model and that involvement and communication. And I think that comes through in all of those leadership values as well, actually. Ed, is there anything you want to jump in with there?
I think you probably touched on some of the points as you've gone through as well, but some of the values, I guess, come through quite strongly with various personality styles of different leaders. So you mentioned trust there, and I think that's one that always gets a lot of discussion when we're running the training courses. It's something that leaders can talk about, health and safety leaders can talk about. Trust is important, but they often, I think we all probably find it quite difficult to define what it is that we do that creates trust with those around us, that the actions that we take day in, day out, the support we provide, all those elements that contribute towards trust. We actually find it quite difficult to describe all the things that we do that create trust. I think one of the best ways to think about that is to think about people who you really trust, and to think about what is it that they do to enable you or to make you trust them as well. So I guess try to think about some of these values in terms of your own experiences and who you look up to, who you see really demonstrate these values, and what it is they do specifically that bring them to life, because that's the thing that we're really trying to encourage people to do, is to think about what it is that brings these values to life in day-to-day work.
That's a really good suggestion, Ed, actually. I haven't really thought about that. You know, it's that modeling behavior, isn't it? Modeling yourself on those people who you admire in the workplace and you've learned from. Because actually, we all know there's probably a limited number of people who we really do trust in the workplace. You know, that's a real shame, isn't it?
It is, and we all tend to be a little bit biased towards thinking that we are maybe better at some of these things than we really are.
Right.
So yeah, that self-critique is maybe another a virtue within leaders, to be quite self-critical, to be able to reflect on what you're not so good at and how you might improve that as well. And it's only by feedback from others, excuse me, and you've got that there, feedback to workers, feedback from workers. Getting that feedback will give you a really accurate or a more accurate representation as to how you come across in that engagement with others.
Yeah. How often do we take the time to do that, to really think about how we are behaving ourselves in the workplace, what we need to work on as individuals, what I did well, what I did badly, and it's something we can adopt with all sort of aspects of our leadership, management, and competency styles, isn't it? Really, I'm not really thought.
Definitely.
So Ed, you touched on what we got sent through some questions actually from Safer Highways colleagues. James Bird from Kia sent some really cracking questions through. So thank you for those people who contributed into that and sent some questions through. Ed, I'm going to sit back and I'm going to grill you now with some of these questions. Is that all right?
Yeah, I'll do my best.
Somebody asked, how should leaders measure health and safety? Current practice is to measure the absence of events, not the performance of excellence. How could this make a difference?
Yeah, so I mean, we always advise and recommend people to think about leading and lagging metrics when they're looking at evaluating how they're performing. Yeah, so typically it has been absence of things going wrong, measuring the number of things like lost time injuries and so on, and seeing if that trend is reducing. And one of the challenges with that was picked up by a lot of safety scientists, including people like James Reason, is that when that number reduces to quite a low level, you end up with very little information to guide you, to help you navigate to improve safety further. And I guess that's what's brought us to try and think much more creatively around some of the leading indicators that we can use to measure our performance as well. So yeah, that's what we're really looking to. So what are some of the things, for example, that you can bring on board from a leading metric point of view? And there's lots of good ideas out there that people are applying that quite well. So things like safety walkabouts are quite common. What I would advocate though as well is that there's also some thought put into the quality of those interventions. We see when it comes to any kind of metrics, whether they be leading indicators or lagging indicators, they quickly drop into becoming a quantified metric. So something really valuable like a safety walkabout, rather than us focusing on the quality of a walkabout, it often comes down to have managers completed X amount of walkabouts, which isn't quite as valuable as understanding the benefits and the interactions that have occurred, to the qualitative side of that interaction.
Yeah, I know you sort of brought that to my attention around, and I've been guilty of it. You go out and do 4 inspections. Well, what's important? The quality of doing some really high quality, one really good quality one, or 4 ones where someone's been sat in the car. And
exactly.
When you think about it.
Yeah, and I think you're much better. I think you're far better doing fewer of a high quality where you're having an impact, you're making a difference. You are genuinely making the job easier for people, safer for people, and by doing that, you naturally start to do other things, like you're building trust. You're showing that you care about the workforce. So you're starting to demonstrate some of the other values and some of the characteristics we associate with good leadership, both for health and safety and just more generally for business performance as well.
That's brilliant. What's your thoughts on like the new view, in inverted commas, you know, safety 1, safety 2, versus traditional safety and behavioural safety and all those things that we've all grown up with and are very, very familiar with? I mean, I'm really taken with some of the, you know, pre-accident investigation type stuff thinking.
Yeah, and I think they all add value. I think there's lots of different perspectives out there that do add a lot of value to how we manage safety, how we can continue to improve. I guess what worries me a little bit is that it can become, I think things have started to become a little bit trademarked in relation to some of these titles. I mean, going back into the 1990s, I think one of James Reason's articles picked up on a number of the paradoxes that we find in health and safety. And one of those included this point around measuring safety by the absence of negatives. And that's been picked up, you know, by, we talked about, you mentioned safety 2 there, the new view and safety differently, all these concepts. So people like Eric Harnagel and Sidney Dekker and so on. And there are others. I mean, we've started to see now safety 3 and the other things starting to emerge as well.
Safety
I think
3? What's safety 3?
Yes.
Crikey, I can't keep up.
I mean, to me, to introduce safety 3 in itself recognises a lack of understanding of what Eric Harnagel was bringing to the table with safety 2. I mean, I have chatted to Eric about safety 2, and I think one of the things that stood out for me was his humility and honesty. I mean, he's a really great guy, really intelligent guy, but his humility to say, you know, maybe calling it safety 1 and safety 2 wasn't maybe the ideal as well. But that's perhaps added to the you know, the confusion around some of these things and hasn't necessarily helped. But so to me, yeah, that these concepts, these ways of framing new perspectives and different perspectives, the substance behind them, I think, is very helpful and helps us move forward, brings new ideas to the table, doing things differently. But I think some of the labeling actually creates confusion. You know, there are a lot of principles in the new view, in safety 2, and so on, that aren't necessarily separate to each other. They're similar or the same. Some of the concepts are very much, you know, they've been around for a long time in the field of human factors. Okay. So I think my personal view is, I think we should maybe move a little bit away around the labeling and branding of some of these things and focus on what's adding value to us as safety professionals, what's evidence-based that we can apply in our workplaces, and not maybe worry too much about the terminology of the concepts themselves.
Right. Well, while we're being slightly controversial and during my time in civils and roads, certainly the major contractors I worked, they had an absolute focus on zero harm. I think even when I was at Hansen, I think back then we had a zero harm policy. What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I find it a challenge, to be honest. I sometimes have to sort of sit on my hands when I see some of the comments on LinkedIn, and occasionally I'll end up chipping into the conversations. But so yeah, I mean, I feel relatively strongly, it's just a personal view, that it's something that isn't all that helpful in relation to managing health and safety on a number of levels. So I think typically, even if it's intended just as a vision, I find managers will still often interpret that as a goal. Some actually set it as a goal. Some organisations will convert it into a goal, and actually, it's not achievable. You know, I think risk. We need to understand that risk is something that isn't. It's not a binary thing. Things entail risk at different levels. So I'll give the example of riding a bike. So I cycle a lot. I enjoy cycling, and to cycle, it's quite good for me. It keeps me fit and healthy, I hope. But it also has dangers attached to that as well. I've been hit by cars on a couple of occasions. So it's whatever we choose to do, whatever actions we take, there's always risk associated. It's not like there's an option that's always risk-free in our choices. And that's the same in the workplace. We can reduce risk in the work activities that we do and manage that as effectively as we can do, but we never really eliminate it. And I think as a leading indicator, you can see that by looking at risk assessments, whether it be for a whole facility or a task risk assessment. You know, you never completely eliminate the risk. So I think it's, from an authenticity point of view, I think it's good to be honest and say, yes, we care about the workforce. We're trying to improve safety, to manage risk effectively. But I think by suggesting we're going to do that via a zero harm is maybe not a sort of smart objective. It's not really achievable.
Just a really positive aspiration then, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So I've no problems with it as an aspiration. Obviously, I think, you know, we'd all like everybody to go home at the end of the day healthy and safe. So absolutely, but also having that realism in there that we're never going to completely eliminate, by choosing to do activities that inherently have risk, that there are those opportunities for that risk to be, you know, those hazards to realise and cause harm.
Well, thanks Ed. I'm sure some people will feel completely differently, so brace yourself. You might have to be on LinkedIn anyway, Ed, but yeah, I know exactly what you're saying there, and I don't disagree at all, actually. So this is a question from the Safe Highways team. Many companies have for years run behavioural safety courses, but nothing has fundamentally changed, so they get dropped or are a tick box. How can leaders and organisations support and create the environment for the work safe message in order for it to become a reality?
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, in many ways, I don't have an issue with behavioural safety as a concept, as a way of contributing towards safety. I think it's when it becomes the focus of managing safety. So, I mean, I used to do a lot of training and development for non-technical skills, and that was very much about the team working and the capability of teams and that ability to challenge each other and have the assertiveness and receptivity to stop the job and reassess the situation and so on. And I think there's a lot of elements from behavioural safety that link into that. When it becomes the way of managing safety in the workplace, I think it shifts the focus away from, you know, some of those latent failures or issues within the organisation, the organisational failings, if you like, within the workplace. So behavioural safety is always about the behaviour of, you know, sharp-end workers, the people at the coalface. If we were to truly sort of embrace behavioural safety as having a bigger impact, a more effective way of managing safety, then we'd also be looking at the behaviours of senior leaders, the management board, the stakeholders and shareholders in the organisation who are also shaping safety for the organisation. So, you know, one of the common issues we see in relation to challenges on achieving good safety performance are some of the goal conflicts that come in. You know, we've all experienced that point in the workplace whereby we've got to get the job done in a certain time frame and we've got to do it safely, and those two can be rub off on each other and cause a conflict, which means that we rush or cut corners to get the job done. So I think for me, it's thinking a bit more holistically about the organisational factors and not focusing purely on the behavioural side of those at the sharp end.
Well, thanks. Well, I mean, going back to the values, when people do things correctly, what's the best way? We talk about recognising and rewarding the desired behaviours we want. I mentioned it's not really as simple as giving away, you know, cash rewards, although I recognise, of course, that is a motivator. Are there any more impactful ways to provide recognition?
Yeah, I mean, before I came back to HSE, I used to work in the oil and gas and maritime industries, and just speaking to some of the guys who are, you know, at the sharp end of operations, I think still, it might seem a bit cliche, but still just a sit down with the team and a genuine thank you goes a long way. And I do mean a genuine thank you. You know, people can smell a rat quite easily if it's, you know, there's no authenticity behind the thank you and the praise for the team. But yeah, just to reinforce that, you know, that was a great job. We got things done on time. You know, Bob in the team stopped the job and we reassessed things. And actually, it was a really good opportunity for us to take that step back, because that could have caused us issues if we hadn't done that. So just genuinely taking that time to reflect, to, you know, pat people on the back and say a big thank you to the team, and reinforcing some of those actions like stopping the job, like using the right tools and equipment. Maybe it's taken a bit longer to get the right kit on board, but again, reinforcing the fact that was a good thing to do, it was the right thing to do. So again, it's that interaction with people doing the job to understand the challenges that they're faced with, and when they take the time out to work around those challenges, even if it, you know, may slow the job down and all those sorts of challenges, to just recognise that was a positive thing and it's really valued within the team and the culture in the organisation as well. Yeah,
no, that's great. Most organisations talk of fair culture or fair blame. I'm sure you've been asked about this quite a few times, but often operatives are disciplined for making mistakes. How should leaders, health and safety leaders, react And I think when we talk about health and safety leaders, we're talking about leaders throughout the organisation, not the health and safety function.
Yeah.
But how should leaders react fairly to human error? I mean, what does fair actually mean, I guess?
Yeah, I think this is the challenge with the term fair culture and fair blame, and we often see organisations using culpability models as well for making decisions around this as well. And I think the problem with it is it usually comes down to somebody making a decision and a fairly subjective decision as to whether it was a reasonable mistake or a reasonable error to make. There'll often be the substitution test. Would someone else have made this same mistake? And we're often not very realistic about that. So I'll say, well, I would never have done something as stupid as that. So obviously it was a stupid mistake for them to make, and therefore it's right that they should be disciplined as a result of that. In reality, it's probably quite likely that I or someone else would make that same error or mistake as well. So I think really understanding human failure is quite helpful to be able to make a more open-minded, a more objective decision there as well. But sometimes I even see HR professionals getting involved in making these decisions as to whether it's reasonable to apportion blame. And often they'll have very little competence around human factors, human error, and so on. It's not really an objective decision that's being made, but just someone's opinion. So it's a difficult one to get right.
Yeah. Well, talk about getting things right. Let's talk to you a little bit about cultural goals and aspirations. Is it possible to set sensible and easy to manage safety culture targets?
Yes, I think with safety culture, I think the term safety culture is quite nebulous. It's quite open to interpretation. So for me, it's whenever we're talking about safety culture, I think it's really important to break down in a little bit more detail and be more focused on what we're actually talking about in relation to culture. So is it the level of support from leadership? Is it the being empowered to stop the job? Do people genuinely feel empowered to stop the job? Is it about blame culture? Do people not open up, and are they not honest during, for example, an investigation interview because of fear of being blamed? So it's very much trying to drill down into what part of the culture is it that is problematic, is causing issues, and then it's much easier then to affect that change in that particular area. So if, for example, as part of the culture, we can see actually we've got a strong blame culture, and that's limiting our ability to learn as an organisation and fix problems in a more robust way, then you can actually start to do things about that. Things can get a little bit lost when we just focus on, well, we scored a 3 for this topic within culture, we want to move that to a 4. It's very difficult to make that improvement then.
Yeah, no, I can see that. Okay, so a bit more sort of 101 safety. Quite a simple one really about how can I encourage my senior leadership team to be more visible in the workplace. And we've spoken about the fact about, giving them KPIs that are sensible in terms of we'd rather they had good value interactions with the workforce and good values actions or whatever. But is there anything else that they can do to encourage them to be more visible?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things I'd say are really important here is, first of all, is understanding what visibility is. I think some leaders, some managers take that very literally, like just, walking the floor every now and again, oh, look, there's Matt over there. And for most of us, it's not just being present at certain points that's important, but it's that approachability. So what I would encourage leaders to do, supervisors, managers to do, is to get out there, show a genuine interest in people and their jobs that they're doing. You don't have to be an expert in the task that they're doing. In fact, you can start to work on some of the other values again here. So if you go over to one of the guys doing a job and want to have just a bit of a chat about what they're doing, don't be afraid to say, I'm the manager of X department. I've got no idea what you guys do. I'm really interested in finding out more about what you do, what you find challenging. Is there anything that we can do as a leadership team to help you out a bit more? Just having a really open, frank and honest conversation like that can be very valuable. You can learn a lot about the difficulties that people are facing, some of the conflicts that they might have in the goals that are set, and so on and so forth. So just being honest, open, supportive, showing a bit of care. So yeah, it's not complicated. It's just that sometimes we're a bit reluctant as leaders. We feel we have to have all the answers sometimes, and that can be a barrier to taking that humble approach.
Is it okay then to go up to some guys working on the side of the road and say, hey, I don't know what hazards are inherently here. Maybe could you tell me about it? Is it okay to say that? Is that detrimental to your standing as a health and safety leader, or would that be received positively?
Well, I'd say picking the right context is quite important, and it probably depends on what level of leadership you have in the organisation. So I think most people appreciate that, you know, the more senior you might go up, the less sort of technical understanding that you might have. If you're maybe more of a middle manager or a supervisor, and the team doing the job might have that expectation that you know more about it. So I think it does depend on what your role is and the expectations around your competency, and also choosing the right moment. So maybe not whilst they're doing the job, but maybe in a toolbox talk before the job, or a bit of a debrief afterwards, and joining in a sort of informal way as well. So trying to select the moments appropriately, and also making sure, if the expectation is that you should know this stuff, then it could be quite embarrassing as well that you don't know that. Yeah. But yeah, certainly honesty usually goes quite a long way with the teams like that.
Yeah, I was always told when I first started out, if something looks a bit dodgy, if you stand there looking at it long enough, somebody will come up and tell you what's wrong with it. So that was good advice. Certainly when I started out. I don't think I'd get away with that now, but it was last question then, Ed, and we'll move on to some human error content that you wanted to cover off. But how can leaders build a culture of performance, delivering profit and safety?
A lot of the evidence shows us that by being caring managers, caring leaders, by looking out for the workforce, by trying to make people feel like they can be, truly engaged, they can contribute to making improvements. We listen to the workforce, we actually make changes based on that feedback. That, if people are overloaded with work, that we help out with those sort of more maybe stress and mental health issues as well. That actually people are willing to give more, that those companies are also safer and healthier as well. So actually by demonstrating care, compassion, working together, not seeing it as you're the authoritarian and dictating everything, but actually a more of a collaborative effort where the frontline workforce and the leadership team are working together to get a positive outcome, usually means that you're healthier, safer and higher performing as well. And things like staff turnover tend to be lower, sickness absence tends to be lower, stress rates tend to be lower. So it's not like a choice, I don't think, that is detrimental in any way. If you choose to properly get on board, to look after people, to support people, then generally the outcomes are positive all around. It's amazing, really, I think, that we don't have more of that positive engagement and holistic drive to make improvements.
Well, that's a big takeaway in itself. Thanks, Ed. I'm going to shoot on now to some of the human error content we were going to discuss, and I know these are a couple of questions you want to fire at me, I think. So,
okay, yes, yeah. So I think understanding people's perceptions on error and mistakes that we make is really important. So I use this one a lot. I go out cycling a lot and end up getting caught up by these temporary traffic lights quite frequently. And it struck me that some people at some point will inevitably jump the red light. So if I was to ask you, Matt, you're in your car, you pull up at a red temporary traffic light like this, you don't know how long the contraflow system goes on for to get around the roadworks, but how long would you be willing to wait there for? Would it be a matter of a few minutes, 5 minutes, 20 minutes? What sort of length of time approximately?
Obviously, I'd find another way round, Ed, but I wouldn't. Of course, I wouldn't. It would be dependent on the road and all the rest of it. But eventually, I'd creep forward, I guess, and just see. I'd assume that the lights were broken.
Yeah, and this is
we're on red at the other side as well.
This is what we find quite frequently, is that there is that difference as well. So some people, when we ask this in large groups, if we were at a live conference, we could maybe ask everyone watching here today. But what we tend to find is that some people will wait 2-3 minutes, which is maybe one extreme, and others might hang around for an hour or more, and that's the other extreme. And then there's this variation in the middle where people are making judgment calls as well at various lengths. So it's just to say that we all have these different perceptions as to what is acceptable and what is appropriate. But we can also explore a little bit more as to, well, why is it that we do choose to jump a red light on this sort of occasion? And if you want to pop up the next image, Matt. So what we tend to find is that people do think maybe they're broken, maybe there's a problem with them. And actually what we can see on the right-hand side of the slide here is actually an incredibly cost-effective, simple solution. So you've probably come across these yourselves, those of you watching today. But at the bottom of this temporary light, you can also see that there's a countdown timer. I think there's about 1 minute, 30 seconds left on this particular one. But that can increase compliance then, because we can see that they're not broken, or if that timer does run down and they're still on red, we can see that there's an issue there as well. So this feedback, providing this kind of feedback, means that we're more likely to get that compliance. So if we understand the problem, why people are non-compliant, if we want to call it that in this case, we can then create a solution that fits to that. And I'm not sure how much more costly these kind of temporary traffic lights are, but I would guess it's not a huge cost that would be a good investment to improving safety.
So here was another few examples of sensible and very low cost interventions in this first example. Yeah,
so this is actually my arm. I think you're already aware of this one, Matt. So it was probably good that I mentioned going out cycling and being hit by cars earlier. So about a year ago, I was out cycling and got hit by a car. Obviously, it wasn't my fault. It was completely the other road users' fault that this occurred.
Yeah.
But again, actually, it was, I think, the interesting thing here was I tried to understand where this other person was coming from. So they were actually in a rush to get to school to pick up their daughter, and I actually felt really bad that it hit me, because I thought, oh well, I could be in that same situation, rushing to the school to pick up your children. You could understand you're not completely focused on the job at hand. But anyway, the method that we've got here is a real simple one to reduce error. So I had some serious ligament damage. I didn't actually have an opposing thumb for quite some time until I had this operation. So this was part of the process before I had the operation. A nurse and various other medical staff came around, checked which arm it was, and at one point, one of them actually drew this arrow on my arm. Now, it might not be quite as critical in the context of this type of surgery, but we also know in other types of surgery, for example, amputations, removal or transplants of organs, and so on and so forth, often we have people doing the right operation but on the wrong limb. So just to highlight, this is such a simple way of making sure that the focus is on the right limb. So in this case, making sure that the operation was on the correct hand, just drawing a big arrow. So very simple, I'd say cost-effective solution, or one of the solutions that you could apply. So yeah.
Yeah, no, a good example. And then this one's a bit, I hadn't done with me, but again, this one which fascinated you, Ed, isn't it?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a sign that's in Heathrow Airport. So before the whole lockdown, I was traveling quite a lot, and I'd probably seen this sign on a number of occasions before I noticed it. But it's a really useful way, a very cost-effective way, again, of reducing people making mistakes in the airport. So if you look at what's been done here to help reduce mistakes, there's a number of things that they've tried to do to improve that usability. So you've got the time to gate and so on. But very intelligently, we've also got the numbering continuation. So when you move from gates or zone A to B, the numbers don't restart. So you don't go to B1 to B23 and so on, but they continue, so that the likelihood of you going to the wrong zone is reduced. So you might be far less likely to end up at zone B or C, because there isn't a 1 and a 2 and so on at zones B and C. So instead of having an A1, B1 and C1, and you might end up at C1 or B1, that is significantly reduced as a potential mistake.
Yeah, another simple low-cost intervention that reduces the potential, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes it's just thinking these things through before you execute it. So maybe it's through learning from other airports, for example, that this sort of model crept in. But if you apply the thinking before you've put the sign up in the airport, it's cost you nothing to apply that kind of solution.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, we're getting to the end now, and there was just Ed and I very often share things on WhatsApp and stuff, things that tickle us. And this is one that we did share. Some of you may have seen this, but we thought this is a good example of where, yes, you're being watched, but also people do make mistakes, and it's not deliberate. It's just that they're not thinking. So hopefully you can see the back of that guy's shirt. It says COVID-19 compliance officer, and he's he's not sat there. The 2 meters apart. It's still 2 meters at the moment, I think. I don't think it's 1 meter plus. Maybe it's 1 meter plus. I'm losing myself now. Oh, goodness me. I should have checked that before we did this. I think it's still 2 meters public. But he's a COVID compliance officer, and he's not compliant. So we had a discussion about this earlier, Ed, didn't we? In your thoughts.
Yeah, and I think you should rightly point out. I mean, I think whenever anyone sees this, the immediate response is to have a bit of a giggle. But again, as a leader, it's just recognizing that we're not always on the ball. We do forget. I mean, it's a novel situation that we're all in, and we've built habits over a lifetime up to this point, and to constantly remind yourself to break those old habits is really challenging. I mean, I found myself out in the car and thought I'll just nip into the shop and pick this up, and thought, oh, I've not got my face mask with me. I can't do that. So it's just reminding ourselves not to be too judgmental on people, to be maybe a bit more tolerant and understanding when we do see this kind of maybe non-compliance occurring as well.
Yeah, no, good advice. So to end with, then, this is a cartoon that tickled both of us really, and it's about motivations, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I think you picked up on this a little bit with some of the questions that came in as well, but just that, yeah, awards, recognition, it's not usually the key driver for people working in a healthy and safe way as well. So yeah, it might be great to get the ball rolling on certain initiatives and so on, but certainly don't see financial rewards or other forms of recognition as critical. I think, as we talked about earlier, just a genuine thank you can go a long way, and is much more sustainable in the long term as well.
Yeah, hey, that's brilliant, Ed. So there's our contact details, both me and Ed. If you've got any questions, queries, if you want to know about the health and safety leadership qualification, which is excellent, by the way, and it's actually mandated by a number of very large organizations now. Really good sort of tool to get people thinking about what their health and safety obligations are as leaders in the round. Or if you want to talk to Ed about any of the wider research piece that he and his colleagues do at the lab in Buxton, then please do get in touch with us, and we'd love to hear from you both. I hope you found this useful, a little bit of food for thought, a few takeaways hopefully, and thanks for your time. Thanks for listening.
Thanks everyone. Thanks.